Hello, and welcome to the Flourishing Conversations podcast, hosted by the Georgia Black Home Educators Network. And we are excited today because we get the opportunity to dive into some amazing space with our guests as we talk about classical education and the God who sees us. So today we will be having a conversation with Christy Somerville. She is the owner of the Lampstand Press, who are the producers of Tapestry of Grace curriculum. Hi, Christina. I'm glad you joined us.
Hi there, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
And so let me just give a little background on our amazing guest today. So she is home educated through high school by her two Ivy League parents. She also earned her BA in literature from Patrick Henry College in 2007. Upon graduation, she became as an author and designing a great books curriculum for high school students. She also designed a literature program for juniors and has written 2 textbooks. During this time, Christina has also taught many groups in co-op, including for the Lampstand Learning Center. She also has conducted many parent as teacher workshops. We are excited to have her. And if I didn't mention, I'm going to make sure I really reiterate this. She is a homeschooler. As a matter of fact, her father was a HSLDA attorney. And so we are so excited to have her here as we discussed how classical education helps us to see God.
Thank you for the introduction, Nicole. So it's interesting. I was working my way back through some different meditations on God. I'm obviously a teacher myself, and it's that time of year when you just get discouraged and tired, and you can wonder, is classical education even worth it anyway? What are we doing here? Why am I doing this? Is this helping my kids? And I was thinking about the story of Hagar in Genesis 16, and Sarai, Abraham, Hagar, broken family, impatience, suffering. Hagar is having contempt towards Sarah. Sarah is treating Hagar like a means to an end, and doesn't seem like anybody is trusting God very much. And then, of course, Hagar does conceive Ishmael, and then, she's feeling contempt towards Sarai. So Sarai sends her off into the wilderness. And there's just this moment where Hagar, after fleeing into the wilderness, she goes. Sarah doesn't send her. She goes. She just feels alone. She feels rejected. She's pregnant. She doesn't have any hope. She's a servant. She doesn't seem to really have a recognized identity of her own outside of just being a servant in this home. And then she encounters the angel of the Lord beside this spring. And the angel calls her by name. He says, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And he gives her a command and he gives her a promise. He says, return to your mistress and submit to her, which is all kinds of interesting to unpack, but I'm not going to unpack it right now. And then he says, I will multiply your offspring. I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for the multitude of them. And there's this encounter that she has with God where she is at her last shred of strength, and she's an overlooked servant, but she gives God a new name. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees me, the God who sees. It's just this amazing moment because she's not a ruler, she's not a priest, she's not a prophet, but she recognizes that God sees her and that he cares for her. And I just love that moment for people who are wondering, does God even see me as a teacher, as a parent, as a person who's trying to obey God? Does God see me? Does that make sense, Nicole? You know what I mean there?
Yeah. So, as you're talking about this, I think one of the things that many of us deal with as we say as the parent, as educator role you're taking on so many things that you do have to be responsible for. So in
Mhm.
the moments of being absolute caregiver, you do have moments where you're like, are the small problems that I'm having, does God see them? The fact that I am struggling to teach phonics to a child who's like has no interest in it.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to pull a child through geometry. This is really my story. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and we're over Christmas break trying to figure out the last of her geometry so we can at least be on track for the semester.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so you're
Right.
having these moments where you're saying, God, this is not huge in the sense of the world, but it's weighing on me. So as his servant in this space, to say that you are having an absolute servant heart towards your household, and you are making sure you're putting your household first, like what and what I'm experiencing, you're really having you are having these questions. And so I want you to talk more about right now. We are literally at the mid-year. And in the story of Hagar, what more can you pull from it and in this moment so that the parent can feel some encouragement in this space?
Yeah. Well, and also I want to connect it also to classical education because if that's the form of education that you've chosen, I think that really does. If you've chosen to do that, it's the time of year when you need encouragement to keep going in that, you know. And so, what I think is so neat to see is that classical education wants us to see reality clearly. We read widely and deeply in classical education. You're trying to get a picture of what is actually real. And when you do that, you begin to see, oh, wait a second, God's fingerprints are all over this world. And classical education emphasizes training the mind to recognize patterns, to ask good questions, and ultimately to see God's personality and his works and to feel wonder at that. So, take Hagar, for instance. She flees into the wilderness. She's overwhelmed by her own sin, the sin of her. These other people that she's, doing life with and is subservient to them. Everybody in this situation is doing something wrong. You've got contempt, you've got lack of trust for God, you've got using a human being to try to further your own ends, you've got all these different problems. And when she goes into the wilderness and encounters God, there's this ordering of her world. She sees her purpose, she's given hope. And I think the same thing can happen in education. I think that's part of what we're trying to give the kids that we're teaching is we're trying to show them God is at work in your life. He's maybe not super visible, but he becomes visible as you pay more attention. There is the promise of hope. There is a future and there is a reality. And as God sees us, when we study, when we teach, we begin to see him more clearly. And as we see him more clearly, we realize all over again how much he sees us. And then that motivates us to see him more clearly all over again. And it just keeps going around and around. And I love that about classical education.
Yes, and one of the things you emphasized was that it really draws you in to see reality, to see the truth of what God has for you in your life. One of the best things I've liked about classical education, honestly, has been the opportunities to have Socratic discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Socratic discussion, it leads us to, instead of always having the absolute perfect answer, we're led to ask more discerning questions. And so as
Yeah.
we look at the classical education, it begins to really take us through understanding God. We get to ask God more discerning questions to help us grow. And so, what can you tell us about in being in that space and actually talking and communicating in the classical education space, and how that can help children to really know the personality of God?
That's such a great question. I love doing Socratic discussions. It's one of my favorite things. Having had a classical education myself as a kid from my parents, and then now being a teacher of students, it is just you just don't always know where it's going to go, which can be very worrisome if you've got like a list of, you've got a mental list of content you need to cover in this class. But I love that classical education gives you this opportunity to look at history, to look at literature, to look at science, mathematics, philosophy, the theory of government, and to begin to see, okay, we can go in a lot of different directions with this conversation. Recently, my students and I were talking about The Great Gatsby, and we were talking about the concept of hope. And in The Great Gatsby, you got a guy who's committing adultery, and that's portrayed as, in some ways, not exactly an admirable thing, but a forgivable thing, because it is a symptom of his hopefulness, of his eagerness to experience all that life has to offer. And we just had a really interesting conversation with my, Christian homeschool students about how, for a person who's not a believer, this is the kind of hope that they have, and how we can, through literature, empathize more with people around us and begin to be able to see that. But when we consider it from a more Christian perspective, we love hope. We have hope. We have hope for heaven. We have hope for eternity with God. We have hope for just life everlasting. And so it was so interesting that wasn't planned. I didn't plan to have that conversation. So it was both an opportunity to learn to empathize more with other perspectives and understand them, to see them, but then also to see all over again what we have as Christians that we don't maybe think about every day, and to more deeply settle into and abide in that hope that we have. That's the kind of thing that I love to see coming out through Socratic discussions.
Yeah, it's like as I think through some of the amazing, beautiful conversations that I have had over the years with my own children, and them, they're able to logically take any situation of the world and lay it up against God's truth, up against what the word says. And also it helps them in ways to really like divide in such a way that what the world is telling them versus what they know to be truth, and how they can actually respond and act to the truth. Because many of us don't realize your kids are not going to be little kids for long. So they're going to be young adults. They're going to be out here in the world. They're going to be making their own decisions. So it is imperative that they have these moments where they see that they are created in God's image, and they are loved and they are known by him. And more importantly, they can lean on him for amazing things. So I wanted to ask another question. And as you're starting to see in this homeschooling landscape, so many new parents come to the space of homeschooling. Mm-hmm. What would be something in particular that you feel like would be a starting point, an amazing place to say, you know what, instead of feeling overwhelmed because you're new, what could you start?
I call this the homeschool 3-step. So I was still a 14, 15-year-old when my parents, who were national homeschooling leaders and speakers at the time, there were 6 of us, and they would take us all over the country with them, going to speak at different homeschooling conventions. And you can just imagine what an interesting experience that is for a teenager to get to watch that happen, right? And so we used to have all these moms stopping by the booth all the time, overwhelmed, new, trying to figure out what they were doing. And I quickly learned, even as a teenager, that it wasn't necessarily the most helpful thing to jump to explaining a curriculum to them. So for instance, in this conversation, I'm not going to be explaining a whole lot about my curriculum. Instead, I found, through watching what my mother did and how she helped people, I found that the most important thing to encourage them to do first was just to really sit down with the Lord and with their husbands and with their children and really consider, who are we? What do we believe God has called us to do? What are my kids like? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Who is my husband? What is he called to do? What is his job? What does his life look like? Where do we agree about what's important for our kids to have? So I learned this thing that I now call the homeschool 3-step, which is where, first of all, you do some real thoughtful, prayerful conversations to assess yourself and to really figure out who you really are and what you should really be looking for educationally, and to be very honest about that, especially in assessing weaknesses and resources like time, money, things like that. And then second step, to try to, go ahead and do your research, try to make a thoughtful decision, choose, somewhere to start. But then the third part of the homeschool 3-step that I think we often forget to do is stop and assess. 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, 6 weeks in, I don't care. Stop and assess how it's going, because, a plan seldom survives first contact with reality. It usually needs to be adjusted some. And so sometimes people really examine themselves and think through what they need and then do their best to make a good pick. But then that pick doesn't turn out the way that they think it should. And then they just kind of keep trudging forward, hoping that somehow it'll be different. Sometimes that happens, but a lot of times you just need to stop and assess, make corrections, sometimes even ditch it and start over. And that's okay. Because when you're just getting started, it's a learning process. You're learning a new career, which is a career as a parent teacher. And I wish I could say to parents, first of all, cut yourself some slack. But second of all, if you start with prayer and self-assessment, instead of just kind of grabbing the first curriculum that's working for your friend or that they say is great, it can be really good to start with, okay, but who are we? Because I'm not my friend. My kids are not her kids. And I need to really think through who we are and really pray about that before I pick something. And then after I pick it, I really need to stop and ask myself, how's this going?
Yeah, I love what you just said there in your 3-step, where you were saying, like, be prayerful, and in that being prayerful, you said to evaluate your resources, your time and money, because let's be honest, it is important.
Mhm.
I have a friend's husband who calls homeschooling that new private school. He was like, it's not inexpensive. You
Yeah.
also said to be thoughtful about the decision that you're starting. And last, to assess, because I do think sometimes we don't assess where we are.
Yeah.
So be thoughtful, be prayerful, be thoughtful, and assess. That is wonderful advice. So I would like to just end lastly with talking a little bit about, in the space, I've had a beautiful experience with my classical education that I've done with my children, because I felt like there were moments where the Lord saw me so clearly that in the child's curriculum, He gave me a moment to be refreshed, because
Mhm.
it sat and reminded me that He has a plan for me, a plan to prosper me, a plan to give me a future. And even in the midst of struggling through this curriculum, knowing I
Yeah.
need to get certain things done, a child is just not feeling it today. We've all had that child who's like, and he speaks to me and say, hey, let's take a break and let them color. He gives me in the moment, on the spot direction.
Mhm.
Can you speak more about, and I think you have a wonderful thing, because you actually are a curriculum creator. You've been a
Mhm.
homeschool student,
Mhm.
a homeschool tutor. So in that space, what are some amazing times? And you can even think back to your mom when she was homeschooling you. Do you remember some moments where you can remember any moments where she felt refreshed from being the teacher of your classical Christian education?
I think my mom is a gifted teacher and she certainly enjoyed it. She particularly loved discussion. She loved exploring ideas. She loved history very, very much. That was her degree at Dartmouth College, and she just loved. She had grown up in a home that wasn't a Christian home, and so I think that the study of history and of biblical history just gave her so much confidence that God is real and that he does care and that he continues to be himself and to do the same things for his people throughout all of human history. And I think, to be honest with you, that my mother found most refreshment just in making time to spend with God every day.
Hmm.
My father brought my mother coffee in bed. You got to remember, she raised 6 children, 10 years apart. So you can imagine, as in the oldest is like 16, the youngest is 6, that 10-year spread. My father would bring her coffee and juice every morning. He'd put them in her hands so she couldn't like flop over and fall asleep again. He'd say, "Now don't spill." And she would like sit there and sip her coffee and sip her juice until she came to a little bit, and then she would start having her quiet time. And my parents just both agreed that as a homeschooling mother of 6, it was so important for her to have that time with God. So dad would do whatever he had to do to make it possible for her to have that. And I just saw day by day, my parents used to say, we are not trying to set a perfect example of following Christ. We're trying to set an authentic example of being crazy about him and inviting you into that life because you can see how good it is for us. And, to this day, all 6 of their kids are now believers, which is, I want to be really careful there. Just because you do your very best to be faithful parents does not mean your kids will be believers. I think we all know that. We've all seen that. I certainly have. But I do think that my parents' faithful example, not just of treating Christianity as a duty, but treating it as a delight, and treating Christ as somebody who they depended on and needed and loved to spend time with. I think my mother found so much refreshment in that. And that was probably the strongest single thing that I remember seeing that I've carried into my own life. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about Hagar in this interview, is because I know that my mother felt like she could keep going back to scripture and back through prayer to the Lord and sort of meet him at that spring of water in the desert and have him keep on seeing her. And then that made her want to see him. And it gave her fresh encouragement to keep helping us to see him. And so here we are, at this darkest time of the year when the light's fading and all of this is happening. And really, are we going to do this for another semester? And just kind of feeling like, yes, because Emmanuel is God with us. And he really is going to continue to carry us. And he has become, human to do this with us, God with us, and we can and we will, because he sees us and we want our kids to see him. That's the biggest gift my parents gave me. And that's probably why I decided, more than any other single thing, to give my professional life, my career, to going on and supporting homeschooling families, is because I want to give other people that gift as well.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think sometimes when we're homeschooling, we're seeking perfection.
Yeah.
And we're honestly sometimes just seeking perfection in life, and we have to realize that we're all fallen. We all have sinned and come short of the glory of God at some time. And so your parents exhibiting to you, you don't have to be a perfect example, but an authentic example of someone who really, like David, was a person after God's own heart. Christina, I thank you so much for this discussion. And I just wanted for you to take these last moments to whatever's on your heart with encouragement for this community, and let us just experience some of the beautiful things that you have here at Tapestry, because you do have an offer for some of our homeschool groups.
Yeah, I do. I think my, heartfelt encouragement to the community would be, God does see you. He really does. And he loved us enough to come and live with us, loved us enough to die for us, loves us enough to give us eternal life. And you really can keep going. Hang in there. So that's my encouragement. And then to try to contribute just the little that I have to give to that. We do have a policy of trying to make a set of all of our curriculum available to any group leaders who are interested in giving it, an honest exploratory go to see if it's something that would benefit their group. So we do that because we don't want group leaders to have to pay for curriculum just in order to review curriculum and see if it's going to work for them. So this offer is that anybody who wants to reach out to us, hey, our group is looking for something new, something different, something maybe, we've done our 3-step and we need to make some adjustments, that we would be just delighted to meet with you, talk to you, see if what we have could fit something on your wish list, and then just give you a copy of that for you to review. And then you can, make your decision from there. But just love to give that small gift to the community, and see if it can be a little bit helpful.
Yeah, if on the screen you will see, well, you can reach out to tapestryofgrace.com. You can also reach out to Christina at support@tapestryofgrace.com. If you go to their website, Tapestry of Grace, you can .com, you can click on the help section and leave a comment. She will also get any information that you provide there in reference to this amazing opportunity to see if this is your way to have a moment with curriculum that lets God see us. And so we thank you, Christina, for the space. We are greatly appreciate you pouring into the community. And may I pour into you and say, hey, in this season, make sure you're getting your rest, and that we are thankful for all those who have come on board or who have already been there to try to support underserved and under-resourced families who are onboarding into homeschooling. So that is it for us here at Flourishing Conversations. We thank Christina, and we'll talk to you next time. Keep having those flourishing conversations.